meaning obligation to pay just so much for that property. So that's the only thing, that eradication of interest and this obligatory schedule of payment, which maintain the original integrity of the promissory obligation. So this is the
Right.
only thing that makes money a true immutable token of value. And it must be an immutable token of value, or someone is offended. There is an injustice. So this is why, just this first solution of this first categoric fault is why mathematically perfected economy is the only just monetary system, because it and it alone not only can monetize all of our production without cost, virtually without cost, but it is the only thing that produces immutable tokens of value. So this is something that Ron Paul has needed to wake up to for 30 plus years, in which he's avoided me. Anyway, so that's our solution of our first categoric fault, which is inflation, deflation, and maladisposition, is simply an eradication of interest and an obligatory schedule of payment. Now, our third categoric fault, I usually give in this order because it's terminal, is this inherent, irreversible, and therefore terminal multiplication of artificial indebtedness by interest. Obviously, second grade math, from all that we've explained so far, we understand that the only solution for that, likewise, is the eradication of interest, which we've already accomplished in our solution of the first categoric fault. So terminal failure are solved, and any mutation of the value of money or inability to monetize further production or the prosperity that we are truly capable and desirable of accomplishing is solved by our first categoric fault itself. It took me a long time to think, okay, what about anything and everything possibly else that could happen? And I had to think about every case that I could conceive of where something else might be going awry, which didn't fit neatly in our first or third categoric faults. And eventually, what happened is I realized in anything and everything that you know how you solve a problem sometimes in software engineering. My brother Ray does this a lot. He draws columns, and titles across the top, and along a left-hand column of labels, and this exists if you do this, and this exists if you do that. And you just put X's in columns and everything until you can see how you would contrive what you have to solve for to make a column with all the X's and O's in it that you need to succeed in this. And in this case, I'm just summarizing categoric faults, and I realized that anything and everything else that we might contemplate to happen actually fell under a categoric definition, which I give to be systemic manipulation of the cost or value of money or property. Anything and everything else, anything and every other crime, a potential crime against us or injustice against us, falls into this definition, because that one of those columns will be ticked if we suffer that malady, whatever it is, no matter what it is. And once I resolved that there was this third categoric fault, which I give in the second place, systemic manipulation of the cost or value of money or property, all of which are injustice against someone, I realized immediately then that being as this obfuscation of the currency only had two powers, and that was to multiply artificial indebtedness or costliness upon us, multiply artificial indebtedness, or we might say dispossession upon us.
Yes.
Or to manipulate the volume or disposition of the circulation in relation to represented wealth. Therefore, that all of these four things that I describe in this second categoric fault, all of those things are actually result from any possible combination of the first categoric fault or the third categoric fault. They result of inflation, deflation or maladisposition, our first categoric fault,
Mm-hmm.
and or in any combination, and or with the third categoric fault, which is inherent, irreversible, and therefore terminal multiplication of artificial indebtedness. Being as, then, our second categoric faults all resulted of some combination of the first or third faults, which we've already solved, therefore, indeed, we have one and one only mathematically perfected economy. So verbally, I've just given the proof that this is the one and one only solution.
It's pretty astounding, actually.
Yes. Well, the difficulty is the categoric faults. If you try and solve everything, then you spend infinity at proving that each thing is solved. It's the expedience of determining that these things fall in categoric faults, which in fact we can account for in their entirety, which allows us to prove that indeed there is one and one only.
And the interesting thing too, it falls under the when you're looking for a solution to a problem, typically it is the simplest answer. And even though we're dealing with a system where there is only a number of variables, like you're getting a loan, someone's getting some money, they're putting it into the economy, and there's interest attached. There's only so many things going on there. So it seems that rightfully so, the answer would be equally as simple.
You should intuit that it would be, but indeed, you see, because these arguments are irrefutable. It's second grade math.
Right.
To understand there's one solution for inflation and deflation. There's one solution for maladisposition. There's one solution which is eradication of interest. The inflation and deflation is the obligatory schedule of payment. So it's the combination of the two that solve the first categoric fault. The third being inherent, irreversible, and therefore terminal multiplication of artificial indebtedness by interest is eradicated by eradicating interest, which of course is not justified once we understand this coming to a fact of one and one only mathematically perfected economy it compels you to turn right around and then examine, well, what is the right of the bank to issue money as a debt to the bank, you see?
Right.
And what is really going on here? So as soon as you come to this, which is, I had the first and third solution when they're implied from my rhetorical question that I submitted to the teacher. So, I spent the next weeks, months, just a handful of months at the most, absolutely concretely examining this proposition of developing and testing this proposition of three categoric faults. And then the next while that I spent before I quote knew unquote that there was one and one only mathematically perfected economy was this, and this reflects on these people who are actually even quoting my words from this parable of perfect economy. This story, you can read it at perfecteconomy.com. Parable of perfect economy. It's not a historic event. It's a vehicle for teaching, which I give a second faulted case where money is just spent into circulation, and Franklin tells this, in this story, which actually in which the words of Mike Montagne are issued through the fictional mouth of Benjamin Franklin. So I have Benjamin Franklin explaining perfected economy, and people now, millions and millions of people who plagiarize my work and who have read the plagiarisms actually cite my own words as if it's evidence of that money can be spent into circulation, when in fact I gave that example to ask my audience. I mean, it's the most glorious thing you've ever heard when you read it, how you can fund government without taxation,
Yeah, exactly.
Except that we would be paying the cost of government through inflation, you see?
That's right.
And that's the thing I gave the example of perfect economy in the natural life cycle of a promissory obligation, which I explain in this first case through the words of Benjamin Franklin. I mean, Jacques Jaquerin plagiarized this in 94, 95. From the first page of his Debt Virus, he wrote me, he asked me about a few things. The next thing you know, this guy's produced a book with my thesis, told wrongly, and in my words, as if my words were historic event. In other words, he plagiarizes my parable of perfect economy, a purportedly historic event which never happened, which issues the words of Mike Montagne through the fictional mouth of Benjamin Franklin. It was even explained in my parable, and he plagiarized it anyway. And so many people have done it since, and an ever escalating number. You know?
That's a big oops. These are important things, but it's still not ethical to do that kind of thing. But let me give you the through a 16-year-old's eyes, what mathematically perfect economy in a nutshell was to this fella.
All right.
So he looked at what you were saying, and this is what he came up with. He came up with 4 points. Now, and this is probably a little bit butchered, but when it's your first time hearing this, maybe it'll help some people out who are trying to wrap their mind around some of these words. Uh-huh. Number 1, no compound interest. Number 2, the dollars in circulation equal the goods and services in circulation.
Great.
Number 3, debts are paid over the lifetime of the product or service or service. And number 4, no inflation or deflation.
Perfect.
So not bad, eh?
Not bad.
That's a 16-year-old. That's a 16-year-old reading one of the pieces of documentation I had laying around, and that's what he came up with.
Totally awesome. I'm impressed.
So it's not impossible to understand. It is, the mathematics is great too. As long as the people understand the issues where we're dealing with the obfuscation of the currency, the compound interest that's involved, and you got to make sure that the amount of money that's in circulation is always equal to the value of the goods and services as well.
Which are elimination of interest and our obligatory schedule of payment accomplish, people should note, without even any regulation. Merely by an electronic system of accounting, which comprises this common monetary foundry, which certifies our creditworthiness, automatically issues our promissory obligations on our behalf in a standardized, generally at least electronic form. We don't really need a physical form of money any longer.
That's right, and
it performs all the accounting too. Our paycheck automatically goes into our account. Our payments against our obligations automatically go out of our accounts.
And the funny thing too is that it's another one of these paradigm shifts where instead of going to when you go and get a loan, so to speak, under perfect economy, you won't be going and dickering over interest. The only dickering will be over what's the lifetime of the product or service.
Right, and as an engineer, this is probably why it's so comfortable to you. Well, a society might bicker over how we should determine lifetimes, or what the lifetime should be for this, or how we might say somebody doesn't take care of their property. How should they be punished or prevented from doing that? And there's all these other alternatives. Those alternatives, the object of them is to accomplish this object of the obligatory schedule of payment in mathematically perfected economy. So mathematically perfected economy prescribes the justice that we're after. It's to our discretion how we may or may not implement that, thus successfully adhering to this or imposing costs upon ourselves. But there's further things for people to understand, which they can only understand after we explain how we transition into mathematically perfected economy, which is the whole reason, really, that you're running for office. Of course, people need to realize this, and you can lead a horse to water, but a candidate who just rises from the people is only got so much sway there, and if the truth doesn't attract the horse to water, you're powerless. So, we realize that, whatever efforts you make can only be so good, and it's up to the people thereafter, and it's up mostly to the people then to gravitate to the effective only solution.
Yeah. And so Mike, if you could spend a couple minutes talking about the actual implementation, because I know there's a page on your website which talks about how to save the economy in a day. And so if you could outline a couple of the things for the listeners.
Yeah, that article is actually, it's sort of a repackaging of the proposition that I provided to the Reagan administration, which demonstrated how to convert a banking system into a mathematically perfected economy. Not just in a day, but actually in minutes. And so the title of the article, I mean, that seems like an audacious claim, but it's just a mathematic fact of how it's to be done, and the people can only understand this if they understand that the implementation exists basically is this.